the 5th unit of the co-learning and the co-learning unit for connected courses. And tonight we're going to discuss the issue of co-learning and its relationship to authority in particular. I have some wonderful guests and some wonderful co-facilitators. I'll just introduce myself first. I'm Mia Zamora. I'm at Kane University as Associate Professor of English there. I direct the Kane University Writing Project as well. And perhaps Alec, would you introduce yourself next as my co-facilitator?
For sure. Thanks, Mia. My name is Alec Couros, and I'm a professor of educational technology and media at the University of Regina in Regina, Saskatchewan. I'm just very glad to be here tonight to be part of Connected Courses. So if you're watching, welcome everyone. I'm going to pass it over to my esteemed colleague Howard.
Hi, I'm Howard Rheingold. I am currently lecturer at Stanford University, and in 2011 started the Pedagogy Project, which Joe Corneli and Charlotte Pierce have splendidly are continuing to carry forward.
Great. Charlotte, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. I'm Charlotte Pierce, and I'm an independent publisher in the Boston area. I'm also the interim president of the Independent Publishers of New England, and that's a consortium of small independent publishers and authors in New England, 6 states. But in 2012, I took Howard's Think No Tools course online, and I was just thrilled with the things that were going through my head from that. So I met up with Joe Corneli and Charlie Danoff. No, I mean Fabrizio, the one of the members who kind of went on with us on the forums there on the social media classroom, right, Howard? Is that right? And they were kind of rattling around, wondering what to do with the project, and so I jumped in, and we got started on finishing up the version 1, version 1, and then we've met via Hangout since almost every week. There have been times when we haven't done it, but we probably have several dozen videos on the Pedagogy Handbook channel on YouTube. So we've used it to do what we call hive editing, and that's where we all kind of glom onto a article or something that's going in the handbook and do synchronous editing, whether or not we're on a video or not, but sometimes we are all on the video as well and talking to each other. So that to me is like the ultimate connected learning, and it's very thrilling, very motivating to me and to a few others, I think. But we're now working on version 3 of the handbook and getting started on doing some of those specific hangouts to develop that.
Great.
Yeah.
Joe, do you want to say hello to everyone and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Joe. I live a little bit north of London in England, so we got 3 countries on one hangout. That's pretty good. I'm from the U.S., though, from Minneapolis, so that's no fancy accent. But anyway, I moved to England to do a PhD, and initially was the title of something like Peer-Supported Problem Solving and Mathematical Knowledge, which completely morphed into something else. It was the ultimate title, which I finished, was Peer-Produced Peer Learning, and subtitle, A Mathematics Case Study. So my background's in mathematics, and the case study was a site called planetmath.org, which is still online, looking maybe a little better than it was when I started with the PhD project, because we rebuilt that. But also, yeah, in the meantime, Charlotte mentioned Charlie. I was presenting at a wiki, the Wikimania in Poland, and I met Charlie, and then I met him again online, and we were both at P2PU as course facilitators, and trying to understand that. We just decided, hey, if you sit in on my class, I'll sit in on your class, and then we can have a kind of back channel of discussion. And so out of that, we had developed a kind of increasingly robust perspective on what peer learning could be, might be, and I ended up developing that in my thesis and with Howard, and it took off beyond our wildest expectations when Howard got interested in it. So that was cool. And so here we are. And now, surprisingly enough, I have a job in a computer science department where I'm applying some of these ideas to computers. So all's well that ends well. It's not over yet.
Fantastic. Last but not least, Lee, would you introduce yourself too, please?
Yeah, sure. My name is Lee Skallerup Bessette. I am what they call a faculty instructional consultant at the Center for the Enhancement of Learning and Teaching at the University of Kentucky in Lexington, Kentucky. Originally from Canada, too. Montrealer at heart. And about almost exactly 5 years ago now, I found myself unemployed, living in the middle of nowhere, and really just trying to figure out what I wanted to do and what I wanted to keep doing with my career. Academic job markets collapsed. There aren't really very many options, and so I, through other means, discovered Twitter and began connecting with digital humanists and digital scholars and really learning alongside them. And when I found myself back in the classroom teaching writing, which is not what I was trained to do, I'm a literature comp lit PhD, I was desperate for a way to learn. I had, no mentors, no real peers, and so I was desperate for a way to learn. And so I took to Twitter and co-founded what is called First Year Composition Chatter, hashtag FYC Chat. And it was a fantastic opportunity to connect with other educators from all different levels, graduate students, senior professors, writing center directors, to really talk about how do we teach writing, how do we do this, how do we do this in the class. It was just an absolutely phenomenal experience, and it completely transformed my pedagogy, the way I teach, and really informed me but also emboldened me because I had this community of support to completely change my class and change my pedagogy and embrace things like peer learning, peer-driven learning, and co-learning alongside my students. So that's what brings me here.
Great. I'm thrilled that we have global representation here in the sense of, international representation, but also we have interdisciplinary representation when we think about this idea of co-learning. So I thought we could start off with just a very simple question. What does it mean? What is co-learning? Maybe you guys can chime in about your own personal take on what that might mean, because I suspect there are varying understanding, varying definitions of what this term might mean.
Well, I'll jump in here. I see two aspects to it. One is to kind of break out of the paradigm of the individual learner who's sitting in the classroom, certainly with other people, but their primary purpose is to collect knowledge, to bank knowledge, and they may, when directed, engage in collaborative activities, but they're really there to gather, and in many cases to compete with the other students. Co-learning is a very explicit commitment to helping each other learn, and that requires knowing what the other learners are interested in, so that when something comes your way that would be of interest to them, you can point it out to them. The other aspect of co-learning that I see is that the instructor is learning along with the other learners, and that requires this kind of renegotiation of authority, because I remember, and I encounter with other educators, that there's a certain amount of fear of saying, I want to learn. In some ways, I think that fear is connected with the thought that that's equivalent to saying, I don't know what I'm doing as much as I had pretended. We kind of don't show what we don't know. And I think for co-learning, you need to show what you don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a key aspect of the notion of learning side by side is revealing kind of the ignorances as much as the strengths and the passions and the interests. So, anybody else want to share their personal take on co-learning?
Sure. I really appreciate how you brought up the whole thing about banking and the banking concept of education. And to me, it's really the co-learning is this learning that does happen alongside the students, where Freire describes the paradigm of traditional or colonial education is that the teacher knows everything and the students know nothing. Mm-hmm. That's one of the ones that's always stuck with me the most, because I've been in any sort of teaching situation that I've been in since I've moved to the States have always been these situations where I've been forced into a co-learning situation, because I've, girl from Montreal, and the first place that I teach when I moved to the States is a Hispanic serving institution, and then I get a tenure track job at an HBCU, a historically black college or university, and then move to rural Appalachia. And so all of these situations where I'm confronted, I'm standing in front of my students who all have had very, very different experiences than I do, and perhaps because I was Canadian, it was very, very easy for me and almost expected from me that I'm like, look, I don't know anything about a lot of what your interests, your experiences have been like. And so it turned into this really rich co-learning opportunity, and there was a trust that was developed because of that between myself and my students that always stuck with me, even if I wasn't actively thinking about or practicing co-learning. That's basically what I was doing, and that really created this wonderful environment in the classrooms that, it was now I try to seek to recreate in those kinds of experiences, even if I have more in common with the students than perhaps I have in the past.
Mm-hmm. I'm struck by that idea of trust. But Joe, yeah, please share your thoughts.
Yeah, I wanted to weigh in. I was gonna defer to Howard, but he jumped in right away, and I think I can defer to him again. Although I don't remember if I learned this in one of Howard's courses or not, but I've certainly heard of this Red Queen hypothesis, which is a little less of the benevolent view. I can just read the idea. It says that it's an evolutionary hypothesis that proposes that organisms must constantly adapt, evolve, and proliferate, not merely to gain a reproductive advantage, but also simply to survive while pitted against ever-evolving opposing organisms in ever-changing environments. So, I don't know, Howard mentioned the competitive thing.
Yeah.
The essence of this Red Queen hypothesis is that if your world is not changing very much, you don't have to learn very much, and you will kind of just stay on your typical path. So you don't have to be competing outright. I think, the story of moving around from different venue to different venue with different cultures and having to learn maybe even how to communicate with the people that Lee was just saying is probably an example. I'm sure she was learning a lot. I don't know if I want to go to say more than her students, but I hope that she was learning a lot, and I hope her students were learning a lot as well, and maybe even that was sparking something there. So I think there's definitely the room for the benevolence in that, but also just adapting to a changing world will do it. And of course, in an evolutionary sense, when you're adapting to the changing world, well, the world's probably adapting to you too. So the students were no doubt aware, hey, our teacher's actually learning something and is curious about us and curious about the culture that we're in. That's kind of cool. So, they probably responded well to that.
I wouldn't mind asking a question that pops up with that, because I think, the environment changing around us and the evolutionary nature of this is that I think, the affordances of technology certainly move us to change, and the sort of the the re-amplification and the heightening of the concept of networks in the way that we learn. But it's interesting that all of this is happening when we still have this, formal schooling infatuation over individual achievement. So it's kind of an odd place right now for, co-learning is something I absolutely, peer learning is something I certainly see as a sort of a natural extension of how we learn, certainly from a network theory perspective. But it's interesting that I'm continuing to find where we actually bump up against sort of resistance towards these peer learning models is often complicated by the situation that we are in terms of, again, this infatuation over individual achievement. And everything we do, the grade comes down to one person, and so it's often, why should I bother with this? Does it, just because it makes us all smarter, doesn't perhaps, it seems like a lot of work to also contribute to the learning of others as well than just myself. So it's I don't know if anyone has comments on that, but it's just, I do think it's an evolutionary piece. But what drops off? Do we continue to evolve towards this way, and then eventually the formal educational piece sort of falls off at some point, like our tail?
I think it's
we're geckos.
Hard to figure out.
Well, I'll make a comment from the Paragon Experiences, sure. The handbook creation and learning how to produce a book, basically. But I know that when Joe was heavily involved in the first edition and the second edition, and then got busy doing his thing, and we were all kind of floundering around, hoping Joe would show up, and kind of lead our sessions or just initiate something. And we've basically, just kind of come out of that because there's a collective desire to continue with the project, and we've spent quite a few sessions lately figuring out how we're going to do that. I think people sort of, it's a constant mindfulness of not looking to the camp counselor to, lead the song around the campfire. And so we had a session today, and we were floundering around, and finally we just got a document up, a planning document, and wrote down a few things. I can share the screen for a second. This is this is my website. Collaboration is the new competition. That's my new motto. Mm-hmm. And here's our document from today. We sort of hive edited that, and Doug Breitbart, one of our editors, he says that was his watchword was no camp counselors. But we wrote down who we were, what we were going to hope to achieve, and this is kind of the seed of a real practical guide to pedagogy that we're going to hopefully produce. But I think the being mindful of not going to your natural default to the camp counselor is important.
Okay. And then that's I'm teaching a grad course and an undergraduate course, and I find it's actually, I don't know which one's more difficult to sort of bring about this particular model, because we try to, we focus first on getting students to establish their connections, but as you say, going back to that camp counselor model, they continue to see, waiting for me to do something, and I'm certainly can default to that role, but it's difficult to, when you're convinced that this is a better way, that this is a much more sustainable way of learning, that this is a necessary sort of mindset outside of higher ed, for our teachers as well. I teach teachers and undergraduate students. It's hard. You want to kind of dig in your heels and say this is going to work. But we still get students that say, well, just tell me what I need to do. Like,
I know.
Tell me the number of times you want me to comment on a forum, or I want it to be counted so I can just check off a box, and it's really hard to do.
Well, before Joe, Howard was, and then Howard was off doing other stuff, and we were sort of missing him, so. There's always this tendency. I think maybe we're just kind of in the evolutionary link phase till we get.
Well, in fact, I think both with the students, the younger students, and ourselves, there's a lot of training that we sort of have to go against the grain in that regard. And I remember with the Pedagogy project, I mean, these were all people who did not know each other. The interesting thing about the project was it started out with an invited lecture at Berkeley that involved a number of graduate students and faculty there, and we met in person twice, and I brought my laptop and I opened it up to collaborate, and using Twitter, I said, anybody in the world who wants to join us, come join us. And you know, within a couple of months, all of the faculty and graduate students from Berkeley drifted away, and people from about, I guess, 7 or 8 different countries drifted in, and none of us knew each other, and it started working. And I wanted to step away and take the training wheels off and enable people to do this without me, but I don't know whether I ever told you about this, Joe and Charlotte, but David Preston, who was part of the group at the time, really kind of kicked my ass. He said, you can't do that. It's not ready to do that yet. So I came back in a little bit, but I think that, again, the co-learning. There's some deprogramming that's involved with the learners who are expecting to be told what to do. So,
yeah, I think, there's unlearning involved with co-learning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I would tell
if you're confident enough, you can tell them, you're going to be able to do this, and they will take that direction eventually.
And I think that's... sorry. I was going to jump in on a couple different dimensions, but...
No, go ahead,
Joe.
Yeah, the thing is, now we're also doing very different things. We're using different platforms, working on, we have the book written, so, catching up. When new people come along, they're always concerned to catch up, and, there's different things they would want to catch up with and stuff. But I wanted to market a different book, which I got used. This one doesn't really need it, though. It's a New York Times bestseller, Nurture Shock, by Poe Bronson. I read another book by him. He's a really good writer. But this, Chapter 8, Can Self-Control Be Taught? It seems really related to what we were just talking about. The only sad thing about it is that chapter focuses on pre-K and kindergarten students. So, but it's nevertheless a really inspiring chapter, and they basically they talk about this Tools of the Mind program, which is I don't know. It reminded me of Howard, and that's what Charlotte was talking about. Taking these kinds of tools for the mind. But one of the things they really focus on is getting people to imagine what they're doing. So instead of just saying go play, they get the kids to sit down and plan out what they're going to play on and what they're going to do and stuff like that. And so even that document Charlotte was just saying is okay, who am I? What am I going to do? What is my role here? How can I envision that happening? And this thing, that program, when they did a side-by-side study, the kids were doing better in standardized testing. Their IQs were higher. They tested higher on IQ tests.
Sign me up.
Kids in the same school. Yeah, I don't know. Can I time travel back to kindergarten and take it looking like that? I'm trying to think how to make something tools for the mind approach to.
Well, didn't David Preston's his Sphinx thing, where the students would just come in and basically kind of discover what they were supposed to learn that day, or what they would kind of design it, and they would come in various states of resistance to that idea, and I think I saw a video of Howard kind of flipping his classroom too. And it seems to me that your group needs to be kind of informed that you are expected to generate something. It doesn't matter if it's a mistake or the wrong thing. Just you're expected to kind of get together, collaborate, and come up with a project or a course of learning. But
it seems that another kind of foundation of co-learning is inquiry, inquiry-driven engagement in learning. So and what you're saying about play and the small ones, children, really rings home for me in a very personal way because I have two small children, and they both recently, you know, they're in elementary school now, but when they were in preschool, they were part of a preschool that followed the Reggio Emilia curriculum, which is essentially a child-centered curriculum where they notice things and start asking questions, and then the teacher kind of responds by continuing to press those questions until the child essentially articulates the curriculum for the day, which turns into the month, which turns into the year, and it's all having to do with projects based on their own reflections and questioning. So it's really powerful. This is what they do with the little ones, but then by the time they get through grade school, we see this hidden curriculum of right and wrong answers. Children's imagination is being hemmed in. Assessments take over. It's a profound sort of shifting in what learning means and what learning can be. And it's a shame because then when we try to instate co-learning in a higher ed context or later on in their educational career, they're lost at sea. And I think that's fascinating that as very small ones in the early childhood development, there is theory around the idea that they know that they can lead their way through discovery, but then after that, somehow they have to listen to a master and be sort of thwarted in that process. Lee, earlier on you wanted to say something, and I haven't forgotten. You want to jump in?
Well, no, it goes back, I think, to what it pulls in well to what you were saying, because another catalyst for me too was I have two really young children as well, and particularly my daughter, who had such a thirst for learning and wanted to learn all of the things all at once, but just this real thirst for learning, and then, going in and teaching my freshman writers, and there's just, dead-eyed stares, and I'm sitting there going, oh God, when does this happen to my daughter, and how can I make it stop, and how can I, stop this from happening, or I don't want to say fix, that sounds too didactic, but how can I get that 5-year-old back, the 5-year-old back in these kids that I know existed. And so that really got me thinking. And one of the things that I always said that Alec was talking about is how do we do this? And I always would tell my students, this is probably the hardest class you will ever take, this freshman writing class, but it'll be hard in a way that you've never experienced before, and that's why it's going to be hard, right? That it's a different kind of hard work that I'm asking you to do, and I might not call it unlearning to them, and I might not use those particular terms, but I tell them, this is going to be difficult for you because you have been schooled on the proper way to learn, whereas I'm just asking you to take the lead. And trust, again, I bring up trust because they really think that I'm tricking them for the first 3 weeks, that it's just, this is, she's not serious. She's tricking us. There's really a right answer that she wants us to give, right? Maybe if we just give that, this will stop, and we can go back to what we're used to. But
make it stop.
No, there's always, and it's interesting to me, the first ones to embrace the sort of co-learning and the peer-driven environment that I'm trying to get going in the classrooms, the ones who embrace it the first are always the sort of smart alecky, probably troublemakers, right? The ones who would walk into a normal class and it's like, this kid is going to be in trouble because they're going to, stand up to me, they're going to backtalk, they're going to do all of those kinds of things. Whereas once I get them co-learning, they're just like, A, they're pushing me, but B, they're also just like, really, I can do this? This is what I've been waiting for my entire life. Thank you. And then they become leaders in that way because it's just sort of finally a style of learning that I can really embrace and get behind and thrive in.
So that's really cool. Do you think you could invite some of those students to edit the pedagogy handbook, and would they get excited about that? Because I think that now I'm going to switch to trying to market the pedagogy handbook, or maybe the pedagogy process.
Can you hold it up,
more so
Joe?
It's like what we don't yet have is any teacher, say, taking the book, and I must have a copy right around someplace. I don't know where it is. It's in the other room. Anyway, yes, Charlotte, I'm sure you can wave a copy around. You know, we have a book. We don't have anyone who's like adopted it as a classroom text, though. You know, to say.
But we have a bookstore in New York that wants to carry it.
Cool. You can buy them in New York. It's big in New York. And if we can make it in New York, we can make it anywhere. But and if we can make it we can make it everywhere. It sounds like she travels from place to place. So, but
well, if
yeah,
I were
like
still teaching,
Preston
I'll tell you.
and, things like that.
Yeah, if
It's
I were
quite a hard.
I would be doing it. Like there's an irony to being in a center of teaching and learning where they take you out of the classroom, right? You're such a good teacher, and how many times does that happen in even the K-12 system? We have a great teacher. You're such a great teacher. Now come out of the classroom, and you will now do curriculum development, or you will now do professional development. You know, and there's something to be said about teaching the teachers in that sense. But you know,
David Preston has.
There you go.
I mean, Howard may know more about this, but I think he's got his success is so good that he can keep doing this stuff in the classroom, but it's not necessarily sanctioned in the curriculum in his school.
Well, he's been very successful
David Preston is fortunate in that the principal is behind what he's doing. And I introduced him to another high school teacher by the name of Don Wettrick, who has a similar class. It's called Innovations, and it's totally up to the student what project to take on. And then the teacher will help them learn what they need to learn to do that. And somehow or another, the word gets around, and the students are ready to do this. These the students from a small school just outside of Indianapolis have come to Stanford twice and talked to my Stanford students, and really woke them up. You know, if these kids from a small town in Indiana are able to take their learning into their own hands, well, yeah, I guess, you know, what our teacher has been talking about, we can do that. Somehow or another, once you can get them to do it, you create some kind of field. But I think it requires either benign neglect or support from the administration, and you need a couple of those students to take the lead. Once you get a couple of lead learners who are willing to jump in the water and swim, then it happens. It's like this love of taking charge of your learning is very innate. It's just so suppressed.
There's a question that's coming in from Twitter that I think is interesting, from @SM Stadner. How can we build more trust for our students? The word trust has come up a few times today, or this evening, and you know, I think that's something that's rather difficult or tricky. I just thought maybe you guys had some ideas about that idea of trust in a co-learning environment.
I think
we certainly have that.
I can add a little bit to that. I think actually a colleague of mine who just retired actually this year, Dr. Richard Schweer from University of Saskatchewan, he's done a lot of work on communities of practice and, you know, what sort of what conditions create a community, and trust is one that comes up every single time in terms of building, whether it's a terrestrial or an online community. But I think what we're seeing here is, I mean, that idea of lead learning is probably a big part of this whole trust thing, is actually modeling learning for oneself. So being able to see a success, whether it's, you know, legitimate peripheral participation or something where you're you know, that instructor again goes away from that more directed sort of knowledge transfer mode into something that actually models learning. And I think trust is built through seeing others become successful in the model that we're expressing. So whether it's whether it's that lead learner, I mean, I still think there's always going to be some sort of hierarchy within an organized, graded type assessment. If we're looking at something that's institutional, so rather than take on that role as being the bearer of all knowledge, become a lead learner, and that's something that we see talked about a lot. And I think that works out really well in building trust in sort of in that sort of model. And I think I've used a number of different examples over the time where students are also and then becomes cliche after a while, but I mean being able to and willing to fail in large unknown audiences. I think that's really kind of an amazing piece amongst all of this, and I do think it leads to trust. I mean, being able to fail miserably online and survive does allow you to build some trust over time, and to be able to see others and their success of actually bouncing back and learning more. I think that really makes a big difference in terms of creating trust. And one last thing I think is just, I mean, we talked about this last week, but one of the things that I think helped in the ETMOOC project, or the MOOC that we created, we talked last week around that LipDub. We created an introductory LipDub, and that little piece allowed a lot of people to share little bits about themselves, even if it was just them lip syncing to a couple of words. So creating some sort of introductory environment that allows people to take small risks that end up in great benefit, I think also allows to build some trust. So I've talked long enough about that, but I'd like to hear others.
I was just making a note that in the pedagogy process, that there's an element of trust when we do a collaborative or a synchronous editing on documents, because someone can just change what you've done, but you have to kind of accept that eventually it will emerge into a better document. Yeah. And also it just occurred to me that, like, Howard does this, and we've tried to do this in the post-Howard era, providing several avenues to express, not just like this where we're kind of trying to gauge who's talking and when you can get your word in and stuff, but the typing in the chat, all these different ways, forums, communities, and then if you have a facilitator or a number of facilitators, co-facilitators, make sure that you acknowledge those people, those contributions, and do the little sort of radar scan of what people are inputting. And so someone may not be comfortable talking in this kind of a way, but they may contribute something critically valuable in another way. So, making sure you check in on those different platforms and venues.
Yeah, I think, I mean, even aside from the live editing, there's also the asynchronous editing. I mean, we have our master copy of the Pedagogy Handbook is a blog. Basically, it's a WordPress site, and anyone who has access to that site can edit anything on the site. And we basically just assume that every edit is going to be an improvement, and the more edits, the better.
Yeah, and then someone will come along and correct it if it's wrong. And
yeah. We've tried to put in more controls and more of an editorial process at times, but once someone has access to the site, we sort of trust them. So how do you build trust? I think you trust people. But no, I'm a little cynical about it. I was thinking about this other project, which is this field notes for 21st century literacies from Kathy Davidson, who I don't know, but some of you may. So I'm not going to say much about it, except that they use a BY NC-SA license, which to me is just like, no, don't go there. It instantly kills my ability to use that stuff. But that said, they built a community, and they have trust within that community and not outside of it. So I think when you're talking about trust, you have to keep in mind that it's not, you're not talking about world peace. You're talking about trust within a specific community, and I think. For those authors or for the people that they want to share with under the terms of that license, that works fine. So yeah, maybe that's helpful just to think about who is the population that has to build trust. amongst, so becoming a community is how they start off in this book, and that seems like a really cool idea, how a class becomes a community.
So I have a question for that. Like, why did you say, is the share alike license part of that, the part that you...
No.
Or what?
No, it's the NC part of it. NC is basically not a free license. It means that, for example, we certainly couldn't take material from that and put it in the Pedagogy handbook and then sell the handbook, because that's commercial use. Even though our license is public domain, we're interested to allow anyone to use it for any purpose. They could put material from our book into their blog and sell copies of that, no problem. So
makes sense.
We take a bit of a more radical stance, but yeah, it's a kind of a trust issue, I suppose, that we were happy about.
And I can't say that we've ever really detected that anyone's stolen the Pedagogy handbook and claimed it as their own. It just doesn't.
No.
It's just too hard to do, I think.
No, that's true. I did find some people who had taken a paper that I wrote with Charlie and massively remixed it and put their own name on it. But lots of people do in academia anyway all the time, so it's hard to tell if that's illegal or just typical. So.
Or just good researching skills.
Well,
I never invited them to join the handbook. I thought that would have been the most cynically friendly thing for me to do, but I didn't.
I'm sensing the trust in this is not so much about trust in other people, but trust in the process, that learning or co-learning is much better than, it's a better process. Like, even, I mean, the cynicism that you display around the not free license is a bit about that, in terms of trusting or not trusting the system, that free will continue to be free, in that sense. I mean, even something like a share alike is, a share alike is a bit of a trust in the system, that you would share, that you would actually share that same sort of, that the process actually works. The process of attribution, building upon other ideas, is actually a viable system that continues to further knowledge and further the attribution and lineage and sort of the knowledge that will actually grow and become better part of the community. I often find, like, when I've worked with some of my colleagues, academics, on papers, for instance, it's less about going into a Google Doc and deciding to make changes, and it's not that they want to. It's not that they don't like, I guess, doing it, but I think there's this real reluctance to overwrite someone else's ideas, because you're basically taking a very bold statement that my idea, my phrasing over this is better, and I think to say that, or to feel that that you are actually improving someone else's ideas, is really tough in an academic culture. When you're actually omitting someone else's phrasing or thought or idea in something like that, when you're actually hoping that you're trusting in the process. I mean, there's a lot of trust in that process, that the editor is actually making a change that is better, and that ultimately this document becomes better. And I think that can be scaled in a way, that idea as a metaphor, that altogether this peer learning piece is for the betterment of our communities and the betterment of knowledge in academic communities or beyond K-12 systems or whatever else.
Well, and I think it makes perfect sense. I mean, think about it. Of course the students don't trust the system. Of course that's where we need to do it. And the students know that co-learning works, because most of their informal learning takes place in co-learning environments. How do they learn and share their hobbies and their interests around whatever pop culture or thing that they have? They join teams, they join groups, the extracurricular activities are the things that are usually the most fun about school through the K-12 system. Those are the co-learning environments. So they know, right? They know they might not know their peers very well in the classroom, but usually they can look around the room and find their common shared interests, and, oh, I know that t-shirt, or I know that band, or we're on this team together. It really is the system. Once they enter the four walls of the classroom, there's a certain set of expectations that they all have that involves leaving the co-learning outside and coming in and saying, this is a classroom. So, you really do have to get them to trust in the system, because they have been, as I keep saying, schooled to believe that there's one right answer, that they're all in competition with one another, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's really important that we, that's why I say I try to model the good behavior And like almost like being a good parent, you follow through. You do what you say, and you say what you do, so that they believe you, because they know it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's the other psychology thing in this book, which I'm not a parent, but I found it quite revealing thinking about my own not so long ago childhood. Is these kids, not only do they learn from each other, but they spend an awful lot of time trying to make their parents happy. And when you go into the classroom, it's like the teacher becomes the parent, and they try to make the teacher happy.
Yeah.
I think another theme of this book is it is totally possible to teach kids good peer relationships, and that would be the case like if they have siblings. There's a whole chapter devoted to teaching siblings how to get along with each other and how to get a lot out of that relationship, because they may not. They may have siblings and they may fight, or they may find the sibling boring and they don't interact. So how do you teach them to get something out of it? So I think, yeah, kids are almost infinitely malleable, but I think the defaults are not necessarily, or say the cultural defaults are not necessarily very wholesome. Kids learn, like, I don't know, drugs, crime. They don't learn good habits; they learn bad habits. And it's a lot to ask anyone to intervene in that. So I think learning to trust the system would also be like, well, what do I get? What do I get out of it? There's some great things in this book, like little gems, like popular kids are more likely to have drug problems. It makes perfect sense, actually, when you think about the nature of peer pressure, things like that. So, systems they often work.
I'm thinking about what Lee said earlier about the kids that take to a co-learning environment quicker, and they're typically the ones that you might also think would, in another environment, in a traditional environment, be the troublemakers. On the other side of that very same spectrum, I think that often the students that are most resistant to the co-learning, ironically, are the ones that are, people pleasers. And also, I also teach teachers. I find that a lot of the those who want to be teachers are the ones most disoriented by co-learning, which in many ways is very disheartening to me in terms of thinking about the future of education. So one question I want to throw out, perhaps our last question, because we're getting closer to the end of the hour. We have about 10 minutes left. The question I want to ask you is, why co-learning now? What is it about education in this day and age and the convergence of the technological advantages we have in this moment in the early 21st century, where we're considering this notion of co-learning as a centerpiece to something called connectedness and connected learning? What role might co-learning play in a networked learning environment? That's a sort of, I guess it's two questions. Why co-learning now at this moment, this juncture? And the second is, what role does it play within a connected learning experience?
Well, I'll jump on that first one, because for most people, those who aren't stubbornly dedicated independent learners, schools have had a monopoly on learning until very, very recently. Now, I challenge you, go to YouTube and type in how to anything, and you will find a 14-year-old who will tell you how to do that. They know that they can learn all kinds of things, the things that they want to learn online. That didn't exist 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago, or 20 years ago. I think that we need to think about, the students that I'm getting in my classroom, college students, the web has always been there. They live in a world in which the web has been there. Increasingly, we will be facing students coming into the classroom who know that a lot of learning can take place in a cooperative, voluntary way. Right now, there are probably 1 million people helping each other play games. I may be underestimating that by a large amount. So that's, my take on the first part of your question.
Well, I think Joe also hit the nail on the head too when he said, when we're not faced with a lot of change, we don't need to learn very much. And this particular time period, is a monumental amount of change. So a lot of it very positive, but some of it very worrying and stressful. And so, the old schooling isn't working. It's failing us in this change. We know, I think, instinctively and explicitly that this can't keep going on the way it is. And so we've looked too, because of the internet, because we can Google anything on YouTube, suddenly we're saying, okay, wait a minute, these two things are happening simultaneously, and so we need to change this. We need to do better. We can do better. We have the technology to, we have the technology, Jim. We have the technology to make it better. And so they are. That's the 14-year-olds, like I said, who are already co-learners when they leave the classroom. They know that there's a better way, and now us old geezers are being forced to see it as well, because we know and we see that the old paradigm just isn't working anymore. So I think that's one of the reasons I would say that why now is, now it's just this kind of perfect storm of change and uncertainty that is forcing us to reevaluate.
I think that's really interesting. I would challenge Howard to say that maybe 20 years ago some people were doing it, but now more people are doing it. So it's and what's really cool about now is, like, you can connect with people out of interest. Your communities of interest can actually include almost anyone, rather than just kind of being specialized on. So going back about the community thing, but I wanted to say something. I know we're short on time, so I think I have a really interesting and weird perspective on this question right now, because I'm like a computer scientist, and I've studied also social media stuff. So humans are doing it, and I think we has lots of good reasons about why we should. We can read the news, we can talk to people around the world. It's really exciting. But I think even in science, you look at all these authors, like hundreds of authors on physics and biology papers. But if you look in computer science, it's really less, and computer scientists are very geeky, and they're the ones who specialize on these tools that we're talking about. Oh, this technology, we mean computer technology. And I would say, from my kind of, I don't know if I'd call it privileged, but weird position in that field, that we're not much further along in that field than we were in 1950, with Turing and so forth. So, it's like, I mean, of course, computers are much faster, they're more ubiquitous, and so on and so forth, but the actual field of artificial intelligence and what computers can do is really limited. So computers are good at things like chess, they're good at things like, Jeopardy, they're good at Jeopardy now, and they're great for email and whatever goes beyond email, like Hangouts and stuff. But actually getting them to talk to each other is what I'm really interested in, and I would say they're kind of singularly bad at that. So to me, it's coming through the net of social stuff that we do into the world of computers and saying, wow, we can be inspired by what people do to think about how computers could change things. That's my own personal day job thing. But I guess I find it fascinating that computers are so distinctly bad at doing what we're all enjoying doing right now, and are fairly good at doing. So humans naturally want to talk to each other. Are naturally curious, and there's nothing about computers that really will do that unless we tell them, hey, this is a good idea, and we make it possible. So I would say, as someone who can speak with some authority on it, I think we're just starting to understand really the theory of how to make systems more collaborative. I mean, really, like Vygotsky probably is one of the most prominent people who did that before. But I think there are theoretical advances, not just in practice, but yeah, stay tuned, because I'm not really sure where that's all going to go. Yeah, that's it.
All right. So we have about 5 minutes. Does anyone want to sort of offer some closing thoughts that are important about co-learning in the last 5 minutes? Charlotte?
Well, I was just going to flash up another project that we're doing here through the pedagogy. We've developed, we've been running these pedagogy accelerators, and it's kind of an evolving process where we take an issue and work on it in our Hangouts. But this is like, a woman had, a graduate student in Nepal had contacted me, and I don't even know how she found me, through Google Plus, I guess, or Facebook. I have another friend in Nepal who's kind of in this field. He works for the Jane Goodall Foundation. But so we've been running these accelerators. We're going to do our third one this week, and kind of help her brainstorm with her about how to keep her project going. She's I don't know if you can read it there, but investigating how to merge modern science with indigenous sustainable practices. So, I mean, this is something like, you know, and we went through a slideshow. They had taken pictures and videos of their field research, something that we would have never been privy to on this intimate a level, you know, before this technology enabled it. So it's just very exciting, and my son is a college student, and I think he's going to join us this week too. So, you know, it's exciting. You know, it allows us to reach out and understand our world and make it better.
Yeah, the classroom is no longer bound by four walls. That much is obvious in your example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's also the flexibility about technologies that you know, we've moved from platform to platform and tool to tool and project to project. As yeah, I'll like to come along with that, and I'll try to get my aunt to join, because she's in Nepal right now. So that's the other thing.
Right, yeah, 9 a.m. Eastern time.
Try to build these little local clusters or local centers. You know, if my aunt starts talking to this woman, you know, that's enough people to go and have a cup of tea, and they can then start organizing things locally in Kathmandu or whatever, you know, around their interests. It doesn't have to be around pedagogy, but
right. And I think the technology lets us we make connections in our solo lives, but then Joe and I got together when I was in London in Scotland this summer, and it was just like, you know, we were just like, had never seen each other in real life before, but we were kind of like already in the stream. You know, we were already buddies. So, you know, it was kind of,
yeah, it's nice. It's really nice. I would say that, you know, I've been involved in other open source kinds of free software stuff for quite a while now.
mm-hmm.
And you know, I've always made it an effort to meet people in person. But I like 3D. It's such a different feel. But yeah, you're right. Hangouts. It is nice to meet people, and you know, that when you don't have that person-to-person connection, you lose a lot of the humanity, and people will be really mean to each other and stuff. I don't think we're that mean to each other. Sometimes.
I did want to get one last word in about co-learning, which is that it multiplies your learning. The teachers got a curriculum, but the more you reveal about what interests you and what kind of problems you're trying to solve, and the more the others you're learning with understand that, you're multiplying the number of teachers. It's you know, I guess it's the mathematics of it is it's factorial. If you've got 20 people in the classroom and each one of them has an idea of what the other 19 people are interested in, that's a potentially, once that catches on, so much richer and exciting than even the best teacher trying to get that knowledge across to those 20 people. And to me, that's the ultimate excitement of co-learning. It's why the web and online communities are so exciting.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a fantastic note to close out on, as we're at the hour now. I just want to thank everyone so much for this conversation, which seems to just be the beginning of something in many ways. You know, my mind is effervescing with all kinds of questions and ideas. We're going to have another webinar as part of the co-learning Unit 5, part of Connected Courses, and that'll be on Wednesday night, and we will hear from Kathy Davidson and some of her students who made that field guide that Joe had mentioned earlier, as well as David Preston and some of his students and the kinds of innovative things they're doing in his learning context. So, you know, we have the conversation will continue beyond this chat. But again, thank you so much, all of you, for your insights and your enthusiasm this evening. I think some of the highlights for me were the question of trust. You know, obviously we talked about authority and relinquishing it, and the question of, or the issue of unlearning. And I also liked how we kind of dug into the roots of learning at an early age and how that informs how we might learn when we become older and the kinds of obstacles and barriers we experience as we evolve in an educational system. And certainly I can see the timeliness of co-learning in the 21st century as educational paradigms shift and we consider what learning means in a new context, in an open horizon for all of us. So with those closing comments, again, a big thank you to the 4 of you, or the 5 of you, excuse me. And I wish everyone a great night. I wish everyone a good night, or in Joe's case, good morning.